Welcome. Jesse, your way.
Alrighty, thank you very much. Tonight, the village board is seated as the committee of the whole. The purpose of a committee of the whole is a informational or review body. There's not any formal action, but it is about gaining information, reaching consensus, and so forth in order to guide future village board practices. So tonight, just have a budget process overview or a budget 101 for the committee of the whole, i.e. the village board. This was a practice that we kicked off several years back, just as there was starting to be some changeover at the village board level with what is the budget? How does it work? How do we get from point A to point Z in this process and all the points in between? So with that, I want to walk through the budget process here in the village of Grafton. Who is your budget team? You'll hear me refer to that quite often, and the budget team consists of myself, the assistant village administrator, finance director, accountant, and human resources generalist. When I first came on board, it was primarily the finance director and myself, and the budget being such a comprehensive document required more hands and more eyes on it. And therefore, over time, we have built out a budget team. Each member of this team plays into the creation of the final executive budget that is presented to the village board each year. But that executive budget, I would be remiss if I do not mention the hard work put into the budget process by the individual department heads and their staff in compiling all of their departmental specific data for the budget team to work with the individual departments on and review to create or move from a departmental level request to an executive budget that is presented to the village board for consideration. What is in the budget? The budget is actually much more than just numbers. We've got a transmittal letter, which is in essence my letter to the village board, or a Cliff Notes version of what the main objectives or goals of the budget are. What are the significant changes, and then also some general explanation to the budget creation. The long-term financial plan, demographic data, organizational charts, budget policies, glossary, and so forth. In essence, background context and policy guidance and explanatory information are all part of the budget. It is not just a set of spreadsheets. And interesting enough, the budget is actually one of 3 financial reports the village publishes each year. The village budget is by far the most comprehensive. It contains all of this plus the numbers. Then we have an annual comprehensive financial report, which is a step down. It is a little bit more boiled down. It takes out some of the background context and really digs deeper into the specific numbers and gives specific guidance to those numbers. And then there is the popular annual financial report, or what I kind of tongue-in-cheek refer to as the USA Today version of the village budget. It's graphic heavy, it's user-friendly, it is meant as a very high-level summary of the annual budget, what the tax dollars do for the community, how they're used. So much more user-friendly, and as I mentioned, a graphic fill. What guides the creation of the budget? The village budget comes to the village board after a significant process. And part of that process are guiding forces that include the state law, first and foremost. State law dictates that the budget be balanced. State law dictates the amount of debt any municipality in the state can carry. State law sets forth regulations on the use of tax incremental financing districts, levy limits, tax levy limits. Property taxes are the primary resource or income revenue for any municipality in the state of Wisconsin. The state, by state law, limits what we can bring in as our primary revenue source. And then also sets forth the expenditure restraint program. That's a voluntary program, which I will touch on a little bit later in my presentation. Secondarily, we have GASB, or the Government Accounting Standards Board. They set forth accounting and reporting rules. What do government accountants need to account for and report out as part of being transparent and open to the public with regards to the village's finances? We've got GAAP, or the Generally Accepted Accounting Practices. These are standardized accounting practices utilized by financial professionals that ensures accuracy and timeliness with our records and the management of those records. And then also we've got village policies. The village has strict policies and specifically sets forth the amount of debt service we can carry, the amount of fund balance we should have available, capital planning process, and long-term financial planning. Last but certainly not least is staff's professionalism. Using our professional experience to craft a budget that meets the needs of an entire organization on behalf of the entire community. It is not just about singling out a department or a purpose. It is about an all-encompassing budget document to allocate the financial resources across an entire organization to best serve Grafton. There are outside influences. So those are kind of the internal guiding forces, if you will. There are outside factors that influence the village budget. As I mentioned, the state property tax levy limits, the expenditure restraint program, which is specifically spending related, or you take in revenues and you have expenditures, not specifically tax levy, but all revenues and then expenditures thereof. Expenditure restraint program is a voluntary program set forth by the state of Wisconsin, basically saying if you don't spend more than 2% more each year, give or take, we will cut you a check with some state share revenue. The unfortunate part of that program is over the years, participation in that program has dropped statewide due to the fact that the funding of that program has dropped at a state level. They have reallocated resources at the state level, so this program, the aid payment to the individual municipalities has gone down over time. Case in point here in Grafton as well. But the expenditure restraint program is voluntary. It is not mandated by the state. So 1 year you can be in, receive your state aid. The next year you could be out if you need to increase your expenditures above and beyond what that limit is. And then the following year you could get right back into that program. So it does ebb and flow that way. It is voluntary, as I mentioned. The involuntary part of it would be the state property tax levy limits. That is a state law where the municipality can adjust their tax levy or the amount of property taxes they collect by a percentage of the value of net new construction or zero. So using that net new construction adjustment each year, the village has historically done that, really kind of helps show responsible growth isn't a bad thing. Property taxes are our primary revenue, and you'll hear me repeat that throughout my presentation because it is very important for us to understand that the biggest piece of our revenue pie are property taxes. We need to be responsible with that, and we understand that, hence the work that goes into providing a responsible executive budget to the board. But it is about maintaining a responsible level of growth in the community to in turn fund the goods, the services that are provided to the community, whether it be added police protection, increased public works presence, parks and recreation amenities and programming. So long and short is responsible growth isn't a bad thing because that helps drive our primary revenue source of property taxes. Other items that do play a factor in the village budget, unfunded state mandates. Case in point, we are right smack dab in the middle of our comprehensive land use plan update, which we are spending a cool $98,000 on. State law requires that we update that land use plan. They don't give us any money to do it. We have to do that at a local level. So that's just a very quick and easy example of an unfunded state mandate that impacts our budget here at the local level. The cost of goods and services, inflation. I will be touching on this concept a little bit later, but that is a huge factor on our village budget. Interest revenues and permit revenues, that's on the positive side of the ledger as far as positive impacts, or in a slow market, not necessarily positive. But then also how the state equalized value plays into the value of our tax incremental financing districts and what we're able to accomplish in those. Moving to the next slide, just want to move into how does the village set up its budget? What is kind of the format, if you will? Katie's breaking stuff. The village uses a fund accounting structure that outlines both revenue and expenditures. The largest portion of our budget by number of funds within it is the general fund. That is general government, if you will. Everything from the village board and administration to clerks and elections to the police, public works, parks and recreation, assessment, legal services, and so forth. Then we have special revenue funds. Special revenue funds take a couple of different forms. In their purest form, A special revenue fund is a segregated fund that takes in a unique revenue. For instance, park and open space has funds come into it specifically for that purpose. There is some tax levy that goes into it as well, but specifically for that purpose, it is captured within that special revenue fund. So in essence, in its purest form, they'd be self-supporting. However, that's not always the case. We have an environmental fund. Long ago, there was a settlement in which the village received settlement funds for environmental testing over in the Limekiln Park area. Those funds were parked in that environmental fund for that specific purpose. And now we are continuing to augment that fund with tax levy as those settlement funds have run out, and we continue to work with the DNR on monitoring in that area. Room tax, that is a very specific type of revenue that the village captures. That is a standalone special revenue fund. There are a couple of unique special revenue funds, being the library and fire department. Those funds really set forth what the budgets are for those two particular departments. Those budgets are set by independent boards and either adopted or rejected by the village board. There's no other responsibility or jurisdiction or authority over those two particular budgets. It's either a yes or a no, and then moving forward. And the tax levy is allocated appropriately. The next set of funds are proprietary funds. These are our utilities, water, sanitary, sewer. Think of those as operating as a business. There is no tax levy within those funds. It is all user fee driven. Debt service can play a role in those funds for larger projects, but that debt service is paid for through user fees. So the utility bills, in essence, again, those proprietary funds operate as a business. So if we are running short of revenues, we have to do a rate adjustment. Sanitary sewer rate adjustments can be handled at the local level. By state law, any adjustment to the water rate needs to go through the Public Service Commission at the state of Wisconsin level. Capital funds. These are the large ticket items. These are either projects or equipment that have an extended lifespan and generally cost over $5,000. And then also incorporates tax incremental financing projects as well. And then last but not least, debt service. Principal and interest payments on loans that the village has taken out to fund larger projects or purchases. And then also impact fees pay into that debt service. In particular, right now, we have impact fees that are paying off debt associated with the municipal services facility, the DPW building, the police station addition, and then parks amenities. We are close to reaching that payoff point for the public works building. The police station has several years left on it yet. I do not recall the specific time frame on that. And then the parks improvement impact fees, that is ongoing with new development, pays into that fund. That helps us purchase new parkland, build brand new park amenities that we don't have before, that we have not had before. So that is an ongoing impact fee that will remain. The other two, the DPW and police station, will expire in time as that debt service is retired. Moving into the next slide is just a illustrative type of slide. Looking back at a historical revenue breakdown, you can see the largest piece of that pie are property tax revenues. This is the tax levy that we collect via the property tax bills, but also some room taxes and then through the TIDs. Grafton is not unique in this situation where property tax revenues are the largest, most significant part of any revenue picture for any municipality throughout the state of Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, we are heavily reliant on property tax revenue. Looking through other types of revenues we bring in, those proprietary revenues, the user fees, those account for about 20% of the overall revenue picture. Then looking at TID donations and transfers between funds, those are the internal accounting practices that we follow to help allocate resources throughout the budget. And then such things as miscellaneous revenues, interest, donations, payment in lieu of taxes, break down about 11%. Intergovernmental revenues, bringing in shared aid, what have you, that accounts for about 6%, and then so on as the pieces and slivers of revenue get smaller. This is not exact, this is for illustrative purposes only. I just simply looked back at the last handful of budgets and put together an illustration showing that we are heavily reliant on tax revenues. Now, as I mentioned, once again, I want to be a broken record here. Property tax levy is our most significant source of revenue. However, we also have to battle the outside market forces. CPIU, the Capital Consumer Price Index Universal, is in essence the inflationary factor that the state of Wisconsin uses to set the property tax levy limit. You can see those green columns show the property tax, or excuse me, the consumer price index increase or inflationary increase in a given year over this snapshot, versus the blue being our tax levy adjustment. In the last column, there's a yellow column showing the tax levy adjustment without the recent successful referendum. So long and short, what you can take away from this slide is the fact that customarily inflation outpaces our primary source of revenue. So that leaves us at a staff level to go and get and find alternative revenue sources, whether it's grants, donations, user fees, park and recreation utilizing their registration fees, rental fees. It is about trying to broaden our revenue picture because, again, just simply looking at inflation versus our primary revenue source, the trend historically has been that inflation outpaces our largest revenue source. Now, there are some exceptions that I want to point out specifically over the last couple of years. In 2021, the reason our tax levy collection or adjustment outpaced inflation is due to the fact one of our TIDs closed, tax incremental financing districts closed. It was a successful one, therefore the influx of tax levy we were able to capture because of the new valuation and so forth outpaced inflation. However, what we wanted to do that year was still comply with expenditure restraint. So we did not capture all of the levy that we were able to. So in 2022, we actually utilized another type of tax levy adjustment called tax levy carried forward. So that was past uncaptured tax levy that we in turn added into what we were looking to capture in 2022, and therefore we were able to slightly outpace inflation that year. Then fast forward over 23 and 24, clearly inflation surpassed our tax levy revenues. And then looking at 2025, just to break it down a little bit, it looks a bit unique, but that is the voters spoke. The voters allowed for that significant tax levy adjustment, specifically for the purposes of funding the fire department. Without that referendum, our tax levy would have once again been well below the state of inflation. Specific numbers to that. In 2025, the consumer price index increase was 3.2%. Without the referendum, our tax levy adjustment would have been 1.65%. With the successful fire department referendum, it was an 18.23% tax levy adjustment. So in short, the public spoke and funded a fire department. So I touched on this a little bit, but what happens if there's not enough tax levy? Well, as I mentioned, there's alternative revenues, grants, donations, friends groups, user fees, impact fees, special assessments. These are all different tools that municipalities can use to bring about alternative revenues. By way of grants, donations, over $1.46 million in alternative revenues have been garnered through staff's efforts in the last 16 months. So again, we are very proactive on behalf of the village to look to take the edge off of that need of tax levy. Debt service, that's borrowing money. There are some projects that are simply too expensive that we cannot finance with cash. Therefore, we need to go out to market and either bond or take a state trust fund loan. A couple of examples are listed there. But then also we do utilize fund balance. We have a historical practice of responsibly programming some of these reserve funds for one-time costs. We do that to help accomplish some special projects within the budget. Again, trying to alleviate that pressure on that tax levy revenue source. The Village of Grafton has a very specific policy about how much of that fund balance we should use. The A high level look at that policy is 25% of general fund expenditures is that threshold. We need to maintain at least that much in fund balance. And taking a look back to, these are audited figures looking back to 2020, we have regularly exceeded that 25% threshold with our fund balance on hand. Therefore, we have over the last handful of years utilized fund balance very responsibly for special one-time projects and for programming as contingency. Examples of this would be the classification and compensation study. We budgeted fund balance to carry out this special project. The comprehensive plan update. Again, we budgeted fund balance to help fund this special project. The lime kiln repairs, that was a contingency expense. That came out of fund balance because that was an unforeseen repair that was absolutely needed to protect an amenity within our park system. And that falls within that contingency category. That being said, we still have a very comfortable exceedance of the threshold. And actually that serves several purposes. Number one, it gives that level of comfort where unforeseen issues come up, we can comfortably address them, but also it helps with our overall bond rating. So when we do have to go out for debt service and we get rated by Moody's, the credit agency, having those funds on hand, having that reserve, leads us to a very healthy credit score, if you will, as a municipality, or a bond rating in particular. Looking into the next slide here, just to dive a little bit more into how tax levy can be increased. I touched on them a bit in a previous slide, but there are four primary ways. A referendum. The OCFD was created through the use of a referendum. That allowed us to exceed our tax levy collection by X amount in order to fund that specific purpose. Levy carried forward, I spoke to that a little bit earlier. Closure of a TID, but then also every year we do the net new construction adjustment. We are a growing village, and that has helped us continue to responsibly uptick our tax levy collections based upon the valuation of new construction to fund the overall service offerings here in the village. So that's all of our revenues, or kind of a revenue picture. And as I mentioned, tax levy is a huge part of our revenue source. And how does tax levy become a property tax bill? So each year when the budget is presented, we walk through the revenue snapshot. We speak to how much property tax levy we will look to collect. Each year we have to file a form with the state of Wisconsin that calculates out the specific amount of tax levy and that it illustrates that we comply with those tax levy limits. But just to speak to what is that property tax number in the budget? How does that translate to the average homeowner on their property tax bill? So the Village of Grafton utilizes an assessed valuation for its properties. This is different than the school district. The school district uses equalized value. Equalized value is a value set to properties by the state of Wisconsin meant to equalize it. Basically, a single family home here in Grafton would have an equalized value commensurate with a single family home in Rhinelander. It is about those uses, single family homes, commercial, retail, and so forth, equalizing that across the state of Wisconsin. So it's set by the state, that is not set by the village. The assessed value, however, is in fact set by the village. We have a contracted assessment firm that does help us with that each year. And we do need to stay in compliance with state law with regards to our assessments need to be within 5% plus or minus of a 100% valuation at the state level. So there is that window there. As the board may recall, we have had to do some revaluations here within the village to adjust our assessed values because of market conditions and so forth. So the Village of Grafton, as a municipality, uses assessed valuation for the calculation of its property tax bills, whereas the school district's portion of the property tax bills uses the equalized value. Now, to walk through what the math is up here on the slide. So we have our property tax levy of about 10.5, and then our assessed valuation of the Village of Grafton at 1.49 billion. So you divide the two and you have a property tax rate of $7.04 per $1,000 of assessed property value. Now moving over to the right-hand side of that slide. As I mentioned, the taxes are calculated per $1,000 of value. So you take an average home of $274,000 divided by 1,000. gives you the 274. 274 times the tax rate of $7.04. That would be the lead to a $1,928 or $1,929 village portion of the property tax bill. Not the county, not the state, not not the tech school, not the school district. That is strictly the village portion of the property tax bill. Those other taxing authorities are also on the property tax bill, and it is paid as a whole. So this specifically applies to the village's tax levy it collects and the rate charged to the property owners throughout the village. Now, I mentioned how the school district uses equalized valuation, the village uses assessed valuation. Well, to put an apples to apples comparison, let's start with the apples to oranges comparison. So the village's assessed tax rate is $7.04 per thousand, right in the neighborhood of the school's tax rate of $7.04 per thousand. However, if you take the village's tax rate and put it in an equalized format, so the equalized tax rate based upon the state equalized values, the village's 2025 equalized tax rate is $5.39 per 1,000. Whereas the Grafton School District's equalized tax rate for 2025, $7.04 per 1,000. The Cedarburg School District is $6.50 per 1,000. That's a comparison of those equalized tax rates. So it's something to keep in mind if folks approach you as elected officials and want to start a conversation about tax rates. They're not exactly the same unless you're speaking specifically to equalized valuation. Moving into the next slide, what does that $1,929 tax bill get you? Well, breaking it out, about $1,100 of that funds the general fund. That is police, public works, administration, finance, building inspection, a portion of parks and recreation, village board, legal, and so forth. That is the largest clerk's office. That is the largest portion of our budget. Then $425 of that goes towards fire and EMS. And then down the line, about $146, give or take, capital projects and equipment. $125 of that $1,900 property tax bill goes towards the library. And then down the line as it's broken apart. So that is the budget as what it looks like, what's in it. I've spoken to how the tax levy and the revenue, what that looks like for the village, how that in turn is calculated over to a property tax bill. But I'd like to back way out and take a look at the budget as a whole. How do you, the village board, get that executive budget to you in early October? It actually starts back in June. Early June, we give budget instructions to all of the departments and we open up what we call our budget module. We use a software package whereby historical data is there and able to be referenced by the departments. And then certain columns are open for editing by the departments. They can't go back and change things in the past. That is locked for historical context, and they're updating and inputting new information. All of that works us through June, July, August, and we start getting into, in August, September, we start getting into staff level budget presentations and reviews. There are multiple meetings between the budget team and the individual departments to talk through what their requested budgets are versus what, frankly, we can afford as an executive budget. Remember, the requested budgets are the departmental budgets that are formed, in essence, in a silo. They are looking at their needs and wants as a department. They are not looking at that as part of an overall village budget. That's what the executive budget does, and that's why the executive budget is presented to the village board. But what we do is, as a budget team, we take all of those requested budgets and meet with the individual departments and work with them and talk to them about how can we make those puzzle pieces fit within that executive budget to be presented to the board. And that takes us through September. The departments also are tasked with presenting to their individual committees, asking for feedback, whether it be public safety or public works, regarding that departmental budget request. During the course of this time frame, we start getting information from the state. Mid-August, we get our levy limit worksheet. That's where we can start working on calculating what can we capture? What are we allowed by state law to capture with regards to tax levy? Then we start getting some of the shared revenue numbers, being expenditure restraint program, computer aid, and shared revenue preliminary numbers. These aren't even finalized yet. These are preliminary reports provided to us by the state, which in good faith, we have to put together a budget and present it to the village board before we have final numbers. So that's where it's important to understand things will and do change during the course of this process, because there is constantly an influx of new and updated information. We get our final health insurance rates during the course of September, October. And again, that benchmark of early October publication of an executive budget is right there. So we can give you guys, as the governing body, a minimum of 2 weeks to review the budget document. We're still working on preliminary numbers when we're providing that to you. These are all in good faith and with our professional background and experience, what we can expect with regards to some of these revenues that are coming in. Late October, we're looking at budget workshops. That's where the committee of the whole will convene. We walk through the budget fund by fund, taking a look at what makes sense, where do we go, reaching consensus, and then moving through that budget. The transportation aid numbers, that's a pretty significant shared revenue from the state of Wisconsin, because we have state trunk highways here in the community. We don't get that until after our budget workshops. That's another significant slice of our revenue picture. Not as much as property tax levy, but it's real money that we need to consider. So again, we don't get that till very late in our process. Early November, we have a public hearing. By state law, you have to have a public hearing and take action to adopt a resolution to set forth the budget and the associated tax rate. And it actually is after that we get our final shared revenue numbers from the state of Wisconsin. So again, there's an influx of information throughout this entire process that ebbs and flows, and it doesn't necessarily fit our specific time frame, because we have our time frame set so that we can adopt a budget in early November, review what that levy and tax rate data is, and proof it and send it to the printer, because by December 5th, we have to have property taxes out in the mail. So that is what the budget process looks like as a whole. I won't belabor this slide. I really touched on it earlier in my talk. The difference between the requested and executive budget columns, created in a silo at a departmental level, includes needs and wants. The executive looks to prioritize those needs and wants and takes into account all of the outside factors and what the organization as a whole needs. Then just to close out, this is something that we are very proud of here in Grafton. For 32 consecutive years, we have consistently produced a nationally recognized budget document. And that actually includes all three of our budget documents, being the budget, the comprehensive, the annual comprehensive financial report, and the popular annual financial report. This Grafton's budget is reviewed by an independent party to ensure quality of reporting of all financial data and applicable municipal information. We are one of only 7 Triple Crown winners. So our 3 financial reports are recognized on a nationwide level. We are one of 7 communities in the state of Wisconsin that can say we do that. So rest assured, as policymakers, you are getting a quality budget each year from that starts at the department level, comes through the budget team, and ultimately to you for final review and review and action. With that, our next steps. In September, the subcommittees will see the departmental presentations of their requested budgets. In October, the executive budget is published and we'll have our workshops. And then in November is the public hearing and adoption. I do appreciate the committee of the whole's time this evening as I walk through the budget process, what the budget is, what it entails, and some of the guiding factors within it. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Any general questions here with this informational
Jesse, have we ever gotten the shared revenue final numbers after we've authorized our budget, and have we had to make changes with that?
We've had one year, Paul, if I'm correctly.
See the public hearing, adoption of the resolution, we made a change. Generally, they're pretty good at giving us full numbers. It's usually maybe qualified or not qualified for restraint. We change that last.
Thank
Amy?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for taking time to do this. My first couple of years as a trustee, we didn't have an overview like this and just had the big binder plopped in
Yes.
our mailbox and we kind of had to figure it out on our. So this has come a long way, so thank you.
Sure.
Great. Thank you. Quick question, the room rate tax, I'm sorry, thank you. The room rate tax, my understanding is that we split that. Can you remind me the portion that we split that between Celebrate?
Sure. So the state law changed a handful of years ago. Root tax used to be just a full revenue source to the village. However, state law changed a certain number of years ago where 70% goes to the tourism entity. 30% is kept here as a revenue with the village. And that 70% goes to that tourism entity to, at a very high level, put heads in beds. They need to use that money to facilitate marketing and bringing folks into Grafton. And it is that independent entity that has governance over those funds. We are simply a conduit under state law.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, I'll take a motion to adjourn. So moved.
Second.
Motion and second, all in favor, say aye. Aye. We are adjourned for approximately 9 minutes. Thank you.